This is the session 2 on full employment. I think that's one of the most important sessions in a sense. The greatest failure, I suspect, for us will not be climate change over the next 100 years. It will be the ability for us to provide remunerative work. That's my first introduction. When we talk about employment, whenever I've talked about employment in Europe, very often people assume you mean employment in the formal sector. But really what we're talking about is remunerative work, and meaningful remunerative work. And as we heard today, we are beginning to see capital labour substitution. As we also heard today, there is an ageing population issue which we will hear from. I was thinking today, most people in this room are probably between the age of 50 and 60, and maybe some of you really are older, such as myself. But we think of ourselves as yesterday's 30 and 40-year-olds, so there is that issue of how to deal with an ageing, productive population. Let's also not forget that there's 1.7 billion people under the age of 15 in the developing world who are coming into the labour force. So there are great challenges, and full employment is at least one issue that we will have to construct over the next number of years if we're to have a safe and sustainable planet. We have 4 speakers, not 3, that are listed in your agenda, and the reason for that is that Antonio Sibiligoi, I hope I pronounced it right, was to speak tomorrow on collaborative entrepreneurship, and is asked to speak today because he has to leave today. So there will be 4 speakers. I still hope that we'll have enough time to have questions and discussion. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Azita Ben-Awad to lead us off on the youth employment crisis, a call for action. We'll then move to Gary Jacobs, and then Liliana Radovic-Markovic, and then finally Antonio Sibiligoi. So let's start with Azita Ben-Awad. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Good morning, everybody. And thank you to the organizers for putting this topic of full employment on the agenda of this year's conference. I am from the ILO, Director of the Employment Policy, so for me it's a natural topic, you can imagine. But if we think back, full and productive and freely chosen employment, the way we used to label it, was actually the overriding objective and at the basis of the social model in Europe and in advanced economies after Second World War II. But over the years, that objective is faltering through and has become secondary. I was told that if I speak from here, I don't need a mic. That has become secondary or derivative to other objectives of economic development, globalization, financialization of the economy. And it is time that we redress that situation. So I really think it's from that perspective of putting back full, productive, and freely chosen employment as the overriding objective. I don't think that in this company I need to explain why employment is important, not only as means to income and livelihood, not only as the source of dignity, not only as a means of the best distribution in the society, but being deprived of employment is simply feeling excluded from the society, from having a role in the society. And I think that this is the transcendental dimension of employment, the philosophical question of how much do we value, our society's value employment, is at the heart of the current job crisis that we see. So it is not just a question of economics being sharply divided on what is the best way for job creation, should we do more austerity or relaunch growth, but it's also about how much we value work and what is the value of work in today's development and well-being paradigm. On this very vast topic, I have chosen to focus on the youth employment crisis. and I don't think that will come as a surprise to you. But let me start by some facts and why we like to talk about the youth employment crisis and not just unemployment crisis, because the employment crisis has many dimensions. Unemployment worldwide is reaching unprecedented dimensions, unemployment amongst youth. But that is only part of the story. We are seeing the quality of jobs deteriorating, and we are seeing what we are labeling as discouragement and detachment from labor market. These are people who are not counted amongst the unemployed, but simply have given up looking for a job. And we see increasing polarization in the society, but amongst the young people themselves. Some statistics and hard facts, and don't forget that beyond all these facts, there are human races and human lives. 75 million of the overall 200 million unemployed in the world today are young people. If you make an average, 4 out of every 10 unemployed is a young woman or man. But if I take some statistics in the European countries, in Spain, in Greece, 1 out of 2 young people are unemployed. What is important to notice that young people are 3 to 5 times more likely than adults to be unemployed. So, frankly, there is a major issue for youth employment crisis that is changing the patterns that we have known before. The statistics were already mentioned, about 12%, historically high in advanced economies. If we look at the worldwide data and statistics, youth unemployment is a global challenge, but there are very wide regional variations. The highest rates of youth unemployment are Middle East and North Africa, and if you think back a little about the labor market roots or social roots of the Arab Spring, you won't be surprised that this took place in this region, have had the last decade the highest rates of unemployment among youth in Middle East and North Africa amongst all regions. But if I look at the regions that were more particularly and severely and suddenly affected by a surge in youth unemployment, Europe and advanced economies come first, and that is the 2 curves. I'm sorry, I don't see the pointer. You see for Europe and EU countries and non-EU countries, you have you see that there is a big jump here between 2008-2009 because of the global financial crisis by 4 or 5 percentage points the rate of unemployment among youth. But as I mentioned, unemployment is only the tip of the iceberg, and we want to look at the proportion of youth in working poor, those who are living below $2 a day income level. And the working poor is an important concept that we use a lot in the ILO, because these are people who have jobs, sometimes have more than one job, but they can't lift themselves out of poverty. And you will find that you have a higher concentration of youth among the working poor than you have the average weight in the population. Same thing if you look at low-paid workers. You will find a higher concentration of young people amongst the low-paid work. Finally, in developing countries, a very big concentration of the young people in what we call informal economy. We don't talk about informal sector. And most concerning trend is that in advanced economies, we are seeing a pattern of increase in temporary jobs, part-time jobs. So the young people are not transiting from a temporary job as a stepping stone to more stable job, but you see that young people are having spells of temporary jobs going into unemployment, back to temporary jobs going to unemployment, and this process can last 5 years. So we are seeing a changing pattern. And what is, I forgot to mention that we are also seeing a new pattern, and that is that 30% of long-term unemployed, those who have been unemployed more than 12 months in Europe, are now young people. This phenomenon was negligible before the global crisis. We also see evidence of what we call discouragement or disconnect, or in Europe they look at it as the NEET category, those who are neither in education nor in employment and training. And this is a mixed bag of young people who have simply given up looking for a job, are disconnecting from the labor market. And if you have hard data, is difficult, but where we have some hard data about the composition of those discouraged workers, we find that you have the two extremes of those who have a low skill profile, low educational background from disadvantaged communities, but also a proportion of those with highly educated. So all these talks that we had this morning about investing in education and using the human capital, if they are not put into employment, it's wasted, and there is a serious concern of disconnect from the labor market and from the society. And the rate of increase of needs, those either in education, employment, training, in advanced economies, in particular Europe, is of concern. We also want to say that youth are not a homogeneous group. We are talking about youth employment promotion, but we need to look at the social background, various criteria that differentiate, because actually there is high degree of polarization amongst the young people themselves. And definitely, if we look at all the statistics, young women are at the disadvantage. Their rate of unemployment everywhere is sometimes 2 or 3 times the rate of male youth unemployment. As well as if we look into participation rate, if we look at pay, if we look at all different types of criteria, more than often you find a particular disadvantage for young women. But there are other criteria that we have listed there, and I don't have time to go over it. So I already spoke about the discouragement. Sorry, I'm going back. Last year, in June 2012, in the World Assembly of the International Labour Organization, which is called the International Labour Conference, that all the delegates, tripartite delegates, as you know, ILO is a tripartite organization, governments, employers, and trade unions got together and for the first time with youth networks, youth were present there, to look at what can be done in terms of action to address this question of the youth employment crisis. And they came up after 3 weeks of negotiation of what we call a call for action. And that actually did 2 things. One is that it's a call for targeted and immediate action. But also it expresses the fact that we have the solutions. We need the political will, and there is a portfolio of tested and possible and feasible policy solutions around the youth employment that can be enacted. And the important element that this conference and the call for action highlight is the need for a multi-pronged approach. There isn't a single magic bullet. There isn't, if all countries were emulating the apprenticeship systems of Germany, they are not going to solve the problem of youth unemployment in their countries. These have to be solutions context specific, the problems, the solutions are context-specific, but it is an acknowledgement that in the past 20, 30 years, when talking about employment promotion or youth employment, there has been a major emphasis on skills education, supply-side intervention. While the main problem that we are witnessing today, and the global crisis has simply galvanized that focus, is a demand management issue. It's about the macroeconomic framework, about the macroeconomic paradigm, about the way that our economic policies are generating jobs or good quality jobs. So you can train, invest in education as much as you want, but if there are no job offers of that quality on the market, it's very difficult to make these things match. So skill mismatches shouldn't be lowering the skill profile to meet the labor market needs, but looking at the economic strategies and the macroeconomic environment to have better opportunities on the offer. So the most important point highlighted is the coherence between pro-employment macroeconomic policies, and I can develop that later in the discussion if we have time, education and training, but in a way that facilitates school-to-work transition, and we have seen there are lots of obstacles on that, active and passive labor market policies, that is activation measures helping young people access the labor market together with social protection as a win-win solution, and entrepreneurship, we already in the previous panel that was mentioned, and ensure that young people, that is very important, and it's not just a question of human rights, that they have equal treatment and afforded rights at work. There is a tendency to think that because there is such a high unemployment or employment prices of young people, that they can be offered lower standards, lower pay, lower than minimum wage legislation in order to get them onto the market. We have evidence in many countries that have tried that this is simply perpetuating the precarious status of young people, and this will be repeating this themselves and perpetuating over the next 3 to 5 years. So in fact, these are not acting as a stepping stone. I don't want to go into much detail of each of these policy areas because I am conscious of the time and I think I am nearing the end of it. But I just want to run through some of the evidence that we have gathered. And that is, when the financial crisis started, under the auspices of the G20, there was a period, a window of opportunity where they enacted all of them together in a coordinated fashion, a stimulus package across. And that made, according to our calculation, saved or created some 20 million jobs. Now, we have seen that window of opportunity closing, and the talk today is focusing on austerity and fiscal consolidation. We also have evidence in countries that have been enacting austerity measures that this is not helping in the medium run or neither relaunching growth nor employment generation. So we are calling for looking at the favorable macroeconomic framework that looks into the issue of fiscal consolidation and fiscal stability, but in a way that doesn't jeopardize the employment generation capability of the economy, productive investment, rather than investing a lot more on unemployment basis or all kinds of costs of social unrest or social exclusion. And I would like to stop there. There is a lot more in the PowerPoint if this can be distributed later on each of these policy areas. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We now move to Gary Jacobs will, in a way, follow up on this with a global model for full employment. And I understand that the presentations will be put on the website subsequently, so that we'll have a chance to look at more greater detail.
For those of you this is your first time you're participating in a meeting of the World Academy, I think this is a good representation of the way we approach issues from a wider perspective and from many different angles. Some of you may still be puzzled as to why we started with Andrea's presentation on dark matter, but actually I think it was the most appropriate way to start, because right now, if we want to graphically have a metaphor for the unknown, dark matter represents that to us. But I'm not a physicist, and I don't really know whether the neutrino moves faster than light or not. But I do know that as complex and sophisticated as physics is, understanding the mass and velocity and location of a subatomic particle is much easier than understanding what human capital is. Human capital is an undiscovered parallel universe that we're still just speculating about and trying to craft. And we've heard many references to it. Andrea started by talking about the intellectual component of human capital. Anna talked about the demographic dimension. Alberto about the sociological, and by implication the psychological dimension. Roberto about the entrepreneurial aspect. Ananda about the educational dimension. And in her opening remarks, Kathleen about the cultural dimensions of something which is still a big X for unknown. And I like very much what Kathleen said in her opening remarks. She said that what we really need is unconventional thinking based on right type of values. And I can't think of any issue on which that's more important today than the issue of employment. And in that context, the issue of economy. And what we hope to do in the next 2 days is to really think outside the box, as Ivo, his favorite phrase, to really look at employment and economy in a much wider context. And Azita has made it easy for me because she's really described the employment dilemma that we face today and the urgency of addressing it. So I need not focus on that at all. We are all aware that we have a serious issue. In trying to think outside the box, I think it's important we put things in as wide a perspective as possible. My conclusion will be the problem we have of employment is because of the narrow framework within which we're viewing it. And when we view it in that narrow framework, we come to the conclusion that there's really not much we can do. Oh, we can try to stimulate economic growth or stimulus packages or some such other thing, but that really, we have a sense of helplessness. And I would argue the reason for calling this presentation Prospects for Full Employment is the world can have full employment today if we really decide that that's what we need and that's what we want. We're a prisoner not of our governments, we're a prisoner of our mindsets, we're a prisoner of our thoughts. And that's why we're trying to explore. This session this morning is a basis for the session this afternoon on new economic theory, where we're really trying to explore the boundaries of economy and where it interfaces with the rest of society, with human welfare, with all of human life. This chart is simply to summarize what we've gone through in the last 200 years, to show how much our life is a moving target, how dramatically things have changed on so many. This is all related to economy, of course. And what's been the result of all this? I mean, unemployment was a problem 100 years ago in the U.S. when mechanization of agriculture started. They said, well, it's the end of employment. All the labor's being thrown off the farms. It was a problem in the 1930s again, before the New Deal and other developments at that time. It was a problem at the end of the Cold War in Europe and in the United States, and everybody, there was a book, The End of Work. And now it's a problem again that surfaced high after 2008, but it's led us to a long-term thinking, well, maybe there's nothing we can do about it. Maybe this is really the end. Well, the last century has been the century of the greatest technological development in history, and that's such an understatement, it doesn't need to be elaborated. And we believe that technology eliminates the need for jobs. It's also been a century of unprecedented globalization, and everybody knows that globalization is eliminating jobs. And it's also been the century of unprecedented population growth, about 7-fold growth in 2 centuries, we saw the chart. And therefore, common sense is we're running out of jobs very, very quickly. But what's the reality? In the last 60 years, world population, highest population growth in history, has grown by 184%. Working age population by 208%, but total employment by 248%. Which contradicts all our basic conventional wisdom about the fact that jobs are being destroyed at a massive rate. It's true, jobs were destroyed at a pretty impressive rate in the last 2 or 3 years. But if you look in the long term, that's simply contrary to the facts. But what does our theory tell us? There is no theory today that explains to us the fact, the reality. And I think the reason for that is because all the efforts to theorize unemployment have been very narrowly confined within a static equilibrium economy, not looking at how fast society as a whole is evolving. Again, that's the topic for this afternoon. I'll skip this because Aziza has spoken enough about the demand. The key number here is just within the G20, we need to create about 400 million jobs in the next decade. And I think about 120 million of those are in one country, India, where I've spent a lot of time. This was just to illustrate the fact that when we think about employment, there's a very large number of factors that are impacting on the number of jobs that are available or whether there are sufficient jobs available. This list doesn't exhaust. This is not an exhaustive list at all. I've highlighted 5 of them at the end because rarely they come into the discussion. The others are picked up by somebody or other and known at some time, even though if they're not the center of policy. But we rarely think about what's the impact of wide disparities in income distribution on the number of jobs being created in society. Global economic assets and financial assets have risen from 12 billion to $216 trillion over 30 years. And we see the massive movements of foreign exchange all over the world, which tells us that money is chasing speculative return rather than being invested back into the real economy, because the money is being earned by people who don't need to consume anything more. They simply want a higher return on their investment. So this is a factor we don't normally bring in. It's a question of values, and it's something we'll come back to this afternoon. I'll come back to the others as well. I'm sorry our colleague Winston Naden couldn't be here. We'll circulate his paper. It's an excellent paper looking at economic theory and employment from the perspective of law, social justice, social values. It's a dimension that we don't usually bring into the discussion. Common sense tells me that full employment must be possible. I'm not talking as an economist, just common sense. Today we've got about 3 billion people who need things and they don't have them. And as we've heard from several speakers, we've got hundreds of millions without any employment and at least 1 billion who are grossly underemployed, and I would say that's probably closer to 2 billion. So we've got a lot of people who need things, and we've got a lot of people who would like to do more, like to be more productive, like to contribute more. We've got more money than we could ever need to make the world prosperous, 216 trillion in assets. So what's lacking? We've got technology, we've got organizational know-how. But something we are lacking is a system, an economic system that effectively utilizes all our knowledge, all our productive capacities, organizational resources, and human resources for what? The question that Ananta and his team have been asking on promoting human welfare, whatever that is. Do we really have a system that's promoting human welfare? One of the points we have been working on in the Academy in our several meetings in the past, and it's too important for me not to miss an opportunity to talk about it. Zita said that everybody knows how important employment is. Well, if you don't have a job, you certainly know, and if your son or daughter doesn't have a job, you know. But I'm not sure we all realize just how important employment is. In a market-driven society, employment is the economic equivalent of the right to vote. If you don't have access to income, you don't have access to any of the privileges that are supposed to be there in a modern society. It's got a dark side, too. In India, a few years ago, India has launched the largest rural employment program, largest public employment program ever launched in the world. It impacts on more than 50 million people to guarantee them at least a minimum level of work, targeted at the poorest of the poor. What is never spoken publicly is something that I know from one of our colleagues in the Academy who's a security advisor to the governments of India for generations, in which he was consulted by the present Prime Minister just before Manmohan Singh took office in 2004 as to what's the greatest security threat facing India today, meaning is it China or is it Pakistan? And he said it's neither of those things. It's those who are not in the mainstream of the progress, the economic progress. It's the rural people who are not poorer than before, but who are much more aware of the prosperity that's coming in the urban areas and are left out of that. And they're becoming increasingly intolerant, frustrated, impatient, and violent. And in fact, statistics clearly show that as India becomes more prosperous, it's also becoming more violent because of the growing awareness that they're being left out. So I think in terms of social security for the world as a whole, employment is a fundamental attribute of human security and the security of nations. And it seems to me there's only one remedy for that. We have to recognize that this is a right. A right. The reason we shrink from that, well, how can we guarantee a right when we don't think we can meet that right, that it's only on paper? I would argue we can meet that right if we decide that that really is essential. This is not a radical idea. President Roosevelt, during his fourth term, shortly before he passed away, he proposed introducing a new Bill of Economic Rights in which the right to employment in America, of all places, free market neoliberal America, it was to be guaranteed. It was there in the U.S. Employment Act. It's there in international doctrine. I think our biggest obstacle today is not that anybody thinks we should have everybody employed, it's because we think we can't have. We are victims of a certain mentality of thinking. We're going to be exploring this more in the afternoon, but essentially I'd suggest we should be looking at employment and economy as a subset of a wider whole, which, for want of a better word, I call society. And every factor that impacts on the development of the society also directly or indirectly impacts on the development of economy and the development of employment opportunities as well. And these are just a few instances. And if our present economic policies and instruments are not adequate to generate the employment we need, then the question is, can we frame a wider strategy for the development of the society, more of that ultimate goal, which I think we all agree is not more per capita GDP, but greater, higher human welfare and human well-being. So, in this session, I propose is what we really need is a social theory of full employment. That doesn't mean that it doesn't have valid economics within it. It means it's not narrowly defined by market concepts. It's broadly defined to look at what any businessman would do if he wants to maximize his profit, to look at all the resources available to him, not just how much money he has in the bank. And we have to look at all the resources available to us. That's why we started, principal reason we started with human capital this morning. We're going to talk about natural capital again tomorrow or in the next session in the afternoon. Because human capital is the most complex creative resource that we have. And it has so many dimensions to it. One we rarely think of, and it doesn't fit in our economic doctrine at all, is the energy and aspiration of people to achieve more. I'm a business consultant. When I go into a company, the first thing I look at is how energized are the people, and how motivated are they, and how much opportunity do they have to express that energy creatively to raise their productivity. And companies that are failing invariably are doing so because they are neglecting, they fail to have the technology to release the energy of their people constructively. So we need, I argue, a human capital perspective on, which is the whole reason for starting as we have. Human capital is not just the most creative resource, it's also the most perishable. If we don't use it, it gets destroyed very quickly. It degenerates very quickly, not just physically, but more so psychologically. I'm going to end just in a couple of minutes now. I know I'm running over. But we talk a lot about education, and everybody who wants to do something about employment talks about education. But I just wanted to put a little information in front of you. The data is very clear all over the world that the higher the level of education, the lower the level of unemployment. I was a little disappointed this morning when Ananda said, and I know that UMDP did the same thing, they took their educational index only up to high school. But the data keeps going right after that. And the real difference between countries is not as much as before in the lower levels. It really comes when you look at the higher educational levels and what would need to be done in order to fill that gap. I was talking to Evelyn when she arrived. India, if it wanted to reach U.S. levels of higher education, would have to create 100,000 new colleges. 100,000 new colleges. What is the strategy if we look at the world? How are we going to create? That's just one country. How are we going to deliver the knowledge of the world to all those who need it in a beneficial way? There's also ample evidence, though it's sometimes controversial, I don't see the controversy wherever I go and talk to companies, that all over the world, businesses find it difficult to get people with the skills that they need. Living in South India, where there are millions and millions of people, sorry you had to ask. Millions and millions. I can tell you at all levels of the society, we find it difficult to get people with the skills necessary. The percentage of the Indian workforce that has any vocational training is less than 5 or 7%. That's compared to about 95% in Korea. They're way ahead. Mexico, maybe 27%. So these are not just buzzwords, education and training. We have to find the delivery systems. I don't think we can say that's impossible for us. So this is a quick list. I hope we'll explore it later, but to indicate there are a wide range, it's not an exhaustive list at all, of sustainable employment strategies that go way beyond what's normally being discussed. Supposing, just for argument's sake, we really put a Tobin tax to discourage speculative investment, not just a nominal tax, and that tax could have an impact of channeling investment from speculative, just earn on your money, into real investments. What would be the impact of that one strategy if it were done globally? So, I hope, and this is on the agenda of the Academy, I hope that over time we can work not only ourselves, but with other organizations like Club of Rome and ILO and other collaborators in really evolving a comprehensive concept of full employment, a comprehensive theory, a comprehensive strategy, and best of all would be if we could take one area, maybe it's a small country or maybe it's a part of one country, where we could get the full cooperation, hopefully in collaboration with ILO, and demonstrate that this is not a fixed issue that cannot be addressed, that it's simply a question of widening the boundaries of our strategies. Thank you.
Our next speakers, thanks very much, Gary. Our next speaker is Lidiana Radovic-Markovic on aging workforce, employment opportunities and obstacles.
Talk about youth and employment and unemployment problems, but I'm going to talk about an aging population, old and employment. Namely, the main objective of my paper is to bring some light to the aging workforce and their opportunity to realize their work, the right to work. Besides, the aim of my research was to point it out that there is certain stereotypes linked to the elderly people, elderly workforce. In addition, I propose some preconditions for overcoming these stereotypes for this segment of population, and also provide them an opportunity to get employment. Along with this, I proposed or I offered one new model with the aim to reach this goal. And finally, I concluded that full employment is an ultimate goal. It is an ultimate global goal, but we cannot achieve this without fulfillment, equal opportunities for all, regardless the age and the job. And I would like to say today a few words about demographic trends, global demographic trends. Some of my colleagues talk or will talk more about that, but I would like to say a few the most important points. Firstly, an aged population changed dramatically the labor market. You can notice that. And also, the demographic trends tell us that by 2050, 2 billion of people will be aged 60 or over. Can you imagine that 80% of people will be aged 60 and older, and all of them will be living in developing countries? Also, recent estimates show us that in less developed countries, in the period from 2012 to 2050, will increase of the aged people over 60 by 3.3% in higher developed countries and 66% in less developed countries, but on the global level, it will be raised by 33.9%. It is pretty much we can notice. And but in some countries, some European countries, 50% of people are still in employment by age 60, and 10% of men and about 40% of women are almost working part-time in the most European countries. But what is the problem? When the people aged 55 or more stay without job, they cannot easily find another one. And also, they are waiting longer than younger segments of labor force on another job, and sometimes it is impossible to continue their careers. It is a problem. And therefore, International Labour Organization last year pointed out that the employment situation is alarming in global world, and that we can expect that this trend will be continued in coming years. What we can do, this statement can be supported by the fact that across the Eurozone countries, it was raised by 11.7% employment rate. It was 11.7%, but in 27 European countries, it was 10.7%. It was, I'm talking about statistical data before 2 or 3 months ago. It is recent data. But what is the problem? We can expect that unemployment rate in the Eurozone will be increased by from 11.7% in 2012 to 12.5% in early 2040. In other words, we can expect increasing and this trend to be continued. And but this problem is not the same for all countries, of course. We can conclude that some of them achieve the full employment, like Austria, for example. Austria has the lowest unemployment rate. It is 4.3%. We know that full employment is not a zero employment. And we can rate one number on frictional employment between 4 to 7%. And according to this methodology, we can conclude that Austria reached full employment, also German, and Luxembourg with 5.3% of unemployment rate, and Poland with 5.8%. But on the other side, we have a problem with Spain and with Greece. Greece has or was recorded the highest employment rate in Eurozone with about 12% unemployment rate, and Spain 12.1%. It is pretty high. Pardon, 27 and 21.6%. And it is a very, very big problem. And as I mentioned, that people who stay without job cannot easily find another, and therefore in European Union strategy, employment issues and aging populations are priority, and they are focused in their strategy within strategy 2012. But it is not easy to solve that problem in some countries because we can notice certain stereotypes linked especially to elderly people. I can mention only some of them. We can find in theory and literature that older people are less motivated in learning new skills and to improve their knowledge, of course, and they have less abilities, mentally, physical, and they are less prepared to respond to the demand in the workplace. And also some of them have low qualification and therefore cannot find another job. Some of scientists think that they are experienced workers and that they require higher wages, and that is another problem why they cannot easily find a job. But in any case, these stereotypes make a negative impact on elderly people. Firstly, in the context that they cannot, they are working in very poor working conditions, and that they cannot access easily the job, and they cannot earn enough or equally as a younger segment of labor force, and that have not enough opportunities to be promoted in the workplace, and so on. There are lots of negative consequences. But these stereotypes we cannot accept as valid arguments. Why? Because healthy older people, they are a very useful resource, and they can contribute not only to their families and to their communities as well, but as well to the societies or economies of countries or their countries, and also some of them may like to be entrepreneur, to start own business or to work for others. There are different motives amongst the older people. But in any case, what is the common for all of them? All of them like to work as long as they're possible or they're able to work, to stay in workplace. And therefore we must offer them some opportunity to be active and to feel fulfilled, to feel good that they're active in later older ages. And firstly, it is important one new model to be found that will be need and satisfy needs that elder people to be employed, and there are a lot of preconditions. Some of them I mentioned in my model. I like to show you that model. This is my own model, which I named the communicating vessels model. Why communicating vessels model? Because each part of this model are very closely interconnected, and they act together and produce opportunity for equal opportunities for all, regardless gender and age. What are the conditions? I tried to include all of them. Firstly, we know that it is necessary some training curriculum, especially prepared for all the workers. And what are the results of that? The result of that is decreasing shortage of the skills. And on the other side, we can fit between workers' competitiveness and job. It is very important. And also, training curriculum for all the workers make an impact on encouraging creative skills. Creative skills, on one side, fostering business startups is very important for opening new jobs. And on the other side, it's providing opportunities for the workers to access work and stay stay in the workplace, and also encouraging creative skills, making impact of encouraging entrepreneurship development. What's happened after entrepreneurship development fosters self-employment and the side increasing the quality of jobs and working conditions for the elderly people. And last, entrepreneurship development, making impact on fostering economic growth, but economic growth reducing unemployment among older workers and reducing poverty, because we know that one of the most problem amongst all people are poverty. And all these elements all together make an impact and support and stimulate employment of elder people, older people, and give them the same opportunities or equal opportunities to find a jobs as younger people. But in my model, I don't like only to stimulate the employment of people older than 55 years old, but I like to point out that state policy can make a very important role in regulating employment. Some scientists share the same opinion, the most of them share the same opinion, that there is not the lack of solution for reducing so high rate of unemployment, but there is a lack of political will. And most of them propose that we can use good practice, for example, from German, which reduce working hours of their people, their labor force. But Germany didn't reduce their wages. It covered their wages with their own resources. So people working less than before, but earning the same as before. But in my opinion, this measure, this proposal cannot be applied in the countries like Greece, Spain, and other countries. Why? Because there is a budgetary deficit, and there is no sources to cover this proportion and these wage differences. In that case, it is necessary to take into account other measures like tax the rich people and use these revenues to invest in new job openings, and also with fiscal policy and new investments into infrastructure, we can make or open new opportunities for new jobs, for not only for old people, but also for younger people too. Finally, yes, I don't like to keep your time anymore. I only would like to make key points, and let's conclude my presentation. Firstly, in my opinion, we must revise existing economic employment theory and strategy. Why? Because it must follow current trends and fast changes in the labor markets, and also demographic, social, economical, political, and other conditions are quite different now than there were 10 or 20 years ago, because we cannot use some economic policy made before 10 years ago now and apply in current conditions. Also, I like to propose that the problem of employment is not to test and point out. The problem of unemployment is a global problem, and we cannot solve it on the individual country level separately. It is also important, and also new economic program, new economic theories must be holistic and must integrate the most important good approaches in theory together with the best practice at the global level. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Liliana. I think I've been asked to add one additional speaker who was going to speak tomorrow rather, but will be speaking today, and that's Antonio Sugoi, who will talk about entrepreneurship. It's the talk that we would have had, tomorrow, on collaborative entrepreneurship and emerging new investment models. As Gary said, one of the factors on employment and unemployment is entrepreneurship. So Antonio, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for letting me intervene today. I will bring my contribution as an entrepreneur and a coach and an investor in young companies relative to the topic, which is how to make science and technology impact on society and the economy. So do not expect from me macroeconomic theories. I will just bring my hands-on practical experience. And I will go very quickly through the slides. So the first is a well-known fact, especially today in Western countries. Employment is generated not by large companies. Corporations are slashing jobs because they are essentially aimed at increasing their efficiency, and so cutting costs is one of their main objectives. On the other hand, small companies, innovative companies, new companies are creating jobs because that's obvious. When you grow, you hire people. The people are key to your success. And so we all agree, I think all the economists agree, that new companies, innovative, growing companies are key to the growth of our economies and to the growth of economy. But one of the key questions until now have been, is it entrepreneurship? Is it nature or is it nurture? So is it a given that we have entrepreneurs, or is there anything we can do to have more entrepreneurs, or is there a way to teach, to learn, especially entrepreneurship? So I think, I will try to make the point that so it's not nature, it's it's this concept, yes. So there are democratizing innovation, that is making innovation out of the research centers, out of the large corporations and into the world, forces us to consider three main steps. What is innovation today? How do we collaborate today? Because of course, at the time of the huge corporations, there was no need, a real need for collaboration among huge enterprises. Everything was inside the corporation. If you instead look at the world made of many, many small companies, then collaboration is key. And then the key issue is financing. So, first of all, innovating today, I think it's important to stress, especially when we are host today at the ICTP, a center of high-level scientific research, that the perceived nature of innovation is changing. In the past, innovation was essentially invention. It was linked to science. It was innovative, it was single discipline, and so on. Nowadays, we are not talking so much about innovation, we are talking about not about invention, we are talking about innovation, that is bringing ideas, solutions to the market. So it's different from research and development. We are talking about changing the nature of products and services in society. It is strongly interdependent. It requires multiple disciplines, and the key issue is value to the customer. And I can say globalized teams and globalized markets. At least even for small innovative companies, it's very important to have a look at how a global market is. One important point, and my presentation is strongly based on my Italian perspective. I think in Italy, it's very important to adopt a culture of and policies supporting positive failure. That is, entrepreneurs learn through repeated failure. And this has to be reflected also in policies. For example, in Italy, if you as an entrepreneur fail once, you get into real trouble. From the point of view of legislation, from the point of view of the whole system will work strongly against you, and there will be strong problems for you to set up a new company. So on the other hand, learning quickly through experiences, and sometimes negative experiences, is one of the key points, I think, from the cultural point of view. So a very important point when I look at scientists, and professionally, I spend much of my time with people at universities and research centers, is that they need to move out of their world, and they need to interact closely as early as possible with the real world where their ideas can be placed. And so this implies, for example, talking about medical devices, go to hospitals, talk to surgeons, talk to doctors, understand the procedures, the medical procedures, and then talk to financiers, and then understand the basics of companies. And speed is key. One of the companies I'm an investor in, and I'm a coach and an advisor and a hands-on entrepreneur, is called Viva Biocell. And this company, which is based in Udine nearby, is a spin-off from the medical hospital of Udine. They are involved in stem cells. So we have devised ways to bring autologous one's own adult stem cells to be utilized as a therapy to a number of diseases. One of them is osteoarthritis, which is number 8 in terms of cost in Western countries. And you can do it much more effectively than using very costly medicines and pharmaceutical products, making use of stem cells. And just to tell you, there is great interest in this technology on the part of also developing countries, because to avoid buying expensive pharmaceutical products and use some medical devices that can be used on the field is key. And therefore, we are in contact with foundations that help, for example, that are focused on finding solutions to the palate and cleft problems that children have in developing countries. So the approach is that of moving from an expensive clean room to a compact device to generate solutions, therapeutical solutions for orthopedics, maxillofacial surgery, and so on. A key element, I think these slides, for those of you who are interested in innovation, will just be a promemoria for further literature research, is that the process of learning how to bring innovation to the market is strongly interactive, and the first 2 stages are talking to the customers and have the customer validation. Collaborating today means that, again, a small company will never bring the product to the market by itself. It will need to collaborate with a number of other companies and involve investors in this task. I think the proper infrastructure needs to be in place, including government policies to make collaboration easy and to make investments easy in collaborative enterprises. I'm not going through this aspect of business model building. Another company I'm involved in is Atonet, and what they did, they shrank taking advantage of the computing power that nowadays is available. They shrank the size of large telecom devices to make rural wideband telecommunications possible at a very cheap, in a very cheap way. So this, again, is a way to bring technologies from the Western, so most developed countries, to developing countries, because if you are able to bring cost-effectively wideband solutions in rural areas, there can be new jobs that can be created there. So it's nurture, it's not nature, entrepreneurship. And what are the strategies? So just some examples from Italy. A new law was launched in 2009, making available tax advantages to companies that work together and collaborate together and have joint projects to, for example, develop a new product or go to an international market. And the result is that those companies that have adhered to this law have proved to be much more successful during the crisis than the other companies that were doing it by themselves. So the aim now is to go from something like 600 contracts in 2012 to 2,000 contracts in 15, and involving 15,000 companies. So finally, my last point is about how to finance innovative companies. The new element of crowdfunding is a new concept that is, instead of going to a large venture capitalist, which would never listen to you, nowadays there are available tools that enable several small investors put money into your company. And these tools are now common also to finance through charities projects in developing countries. And the internet is there just to help you. And this is a way also for brilliant entrepreneurs to collect some money in the early stages. The second step is again involving not huge corporations or large venture capitalists, but business angels. That is, people who invest into small companies, their own private money, for fun, sometimes as well. And but especially because it's very important to have real entrepreneurs that have seasoned, that have experience, work with young entrepreneurs. And then the last stage is venture capital. So this is just some crowdsourcing platforms. There are 16 in Italy, and something like 13 million euros annually are being financed through this. And I'm not going through the incubator program. There is finally, we had to wait many years in Italy before getting a law in supporting startups, and but now finally we have it. And so my final word is, let's collaborate also and take into advantage this perspective from young innovative companies. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. The floor is open for questions and comments. Let's start with Raoul.
So, if you allow me to get the first question of today, thank you for that. And I want to come back to unemployment and employment. So, looking somewhat in the future in the next 30, 40, 50 years, the robotization of labor will go on, and probably with accelerated speed. So I miss in the analysis the impact of robots in past century. Now, this is technological progress. I do not discuss that. But there is a contradiction in it. That is the taxation. We have, at least in Europe, an exaggerated tax on labor, on human labor. That's one thing. The robots have a taxation system of a production assets, which, now, due to, let's say, the market economy, is much lower and is decreasing even in the crisis today. So we have an absolute contradiction going on. So, and my question is to the experts: why is it not, or not why, but please give comments on that. That's one thing. That's one contradiction. The second is, I was thinking of Guido, that at least in my country, some neighborhood countries, the contradiction, the built-in contradiction in the unions. Up to now, in my life, I haven't heard any proposal by the union about employment and unemployment. Maybe I'm ignorant, but so therefore my questions. So somehow, if we want to get out of that contradiction, or a series of contradictions, and even when the common sense says that we could have full employment, then somehow, that is my question, how do we get out? Or is there any chance to get out of these fundamental contradictions you are doing? Thank you.
Why don't we take a few questions and ask Peter? Do they need the microphone?
They don't need it. I mean, it's up to you. Can't be heard.
I'd like to follow on from Raoul. I was going to make the same point, but let me make a few other points and questions as well. I mean, we do live in a globalized world, but that doesn't mean that all these issues are ones that need solutions at the global level. I'll be speaking tomorrow in a session on networks, and we clearly live in private networks, we live in social networks, and it's one of the characteristics, the perennial characteristic of these networks, that they will result in inequalities of scale. And this very much supports the last presentation, that it's almost inevitable that the job creation in the future will be in small businesses, innovative small businesses. You know, we live in the legacy of our own demographic and industrial revolutions of the last century that have left us with models of employment that were built up in a very different environment. In the industrial revolution that we lived through in Europe and in the US, there was a premium to economies of scale for mass production. That won't exist in the future, and we have this very different environment of different technologies, whether it's the information technologies or biotechnologies. These don't give the same premiums to economies of scale. So we will have a predominance of small units of employment. And this then brings me to the point that we've seen in the European Union that, and it sounds a cruel observation, but the level of unemployment is society's choice. We know the solutions. We can choose as a society what level of unemployment is socially acceptable to us. And we've made very different choices within the European Union. There is no external inevitability that we have 25% unemployment in Spain and 5% in Germany. This is a choice of these societies. I mean, it must lead us to question the political systems that we live with, because these choices are made by the democratic process that has led to a selection of policies in these countries with this result. So we can't look to some sort of international framework to solve these essentially national policy problems. Now, Raoul was absolutely right that one of the key issues in employment is the level of taxation on labour. And this is one of the big differentials in Europe that really makes an enormous difference between whether we have 20% unemployment or 5% unemployment. And yet we are in a situation where we still make societal choices that it's more easy, it's more convenient still to rely on these traditional sources of taxation than to shift taxation into resource use. And the same with investment. Governments are responsible for very large proportions of investment in society, and they choose to have enormous subsidies to fossil fuel use with very little impact on employment and very little investment in the newer technologies and energy systems that would have a much higher employment content. So these are society's choices that we're talking about, not some external imposition on us. Thank you.
Yes, perfect.
Take one more comment.
Yeah, I just picking up on Peter's comment there. I'd like to ask the panel, how much should we be looking to the market to solve these problems? And how much should we be looking to the state or organization or legal and political frameworks to solve the problem? Is it a market solution or is it a state-driven solution?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. I agree with Peter and
We hear you.
but yeah, but no, but I didn't want to show my back to distinguished gentlemen. I agree with Peter and Raoul, but I want to add, one element. We need to talk about entry and exit to the market for labor. We have serious barriers we created, and then that type of inflexibility in the labor codes are very harmful to exit in Spain. One of the reasons is that you need to pay very huge, you want to hire, huge salaries, so people don't want to create jobs. And the question to Azita, if you could specify this macroeconomic policy which encourage making that.
Thank you. Let me turn to our panel now. Come around for another round of. Okay, we have two more. And then.
It's a very, very quick question. I'm wondering whether maybe Gary can say something about human invention and innovation and education and the possibility of training a new generation that can actually think innovatively and create jobs, not seek jobs. So job creation versus job seekers, job creators and job seekers. The second question is, I think there is an enormous possibility now that we can think of a new generation of jobs, what they call green jobs, based on green technology, green science, and green innovation. And I would like to comment on that.
Let's take a round of comments.
Just a very short comment. Exploiting what is seen here on screen, let's collaborate. By tomorrow night we will have to discuss whether this forum was successful or not. And I believe that the success of the forum will be judged on the number of collaboration agreements at the personal level that have been reached during the forum. So, you give your visit card and discuss whether Antonio should come to Canada or somebody else should go to India or whatever.
Everybody should come to Canada.
Okay, Canada. We will list the number of collaboration agreements that have been reached during the forum. Okay? Do you agree?
Good.
Yes, I'd like to ask the panel, or challenge the panel, on the goal of full employment. I think John von Neumann once wrote that the asymptote of technology will be machines that can make the machines that provide all of the goods and services that we need, subject to the endowments of the planet. That means asymptotically the economy will produce no employment whatsoever, and we'll all have access to the goods and services required. So is it not necessary to tease apart the notion of employment as the means, the sole or major means of getting access to the goods and services we need, from the distribution of the things that we can actually produce?
Just one last comment at the very far left, please.
Just in reference to employment, just making a distinction between ends and means. And it looks like, Jerry alluded to it in his presentation. I'm just concerned about employment becoming the end by itself, rather than looking at what the means, which is human well-being. Because then linking the dots, if you kind of create employment with it, and then you have all the nuances of whether it's safe employment, whether it's employment that is what people want, it kind of creates the consumption. If it's driven by income, then you have an impact on the natural systems, because then it goes into resource density, and then you have a deteriorating environmental system. Then has a feedback effect again, and you get a really vicious cycle. So I just want, in terms of the interdependency among all these various factors, so always making sure that what is the end that we're looking for, and not getting steeped up into the means.
I saw that in order to interpret the unemployment of young people, many reasons have been put on the table. Probably one has not been put in there. Probably it's a black labor, black boy. This is the point that can be taken into account, at least for certain countries. So that's absolutely.
Okay, let me turn to our panelists now. If they want to spend 2 minutes just giving some comments on either what they heard generally or if it was specifically of interest to them. I'll start with you.
Yes, I can give some short answer to the last question. Yes, we are not talking about black economy or informal economy. It is a much wider topic for discussion, and it is we must discuss it separately. We only mentioned key points of the problem and try to find some new model and new proposals. And I think the aim of our meeting here is to collect the best approaches, and after that to make one general conclusion and maybe to propose some strategy and policy. Black economy and foreign economy are something quite different, and we must not discuss in this session. But about youth, was talking my colleague, and maybe she can add something to my reply.
Well, let me start with some other questions, and I will come back to the last one. I was precisely asked to elaborate a little further on that pro-employment macroeconomic framework, and I think that is of essence. If some of you have looked into the history of the economic and financial architecture after the Second World War, you saw that the primary role of the IMF, International Monetary Fund, was one of the primary roles, stability in financial markets, but with the goal of full and productive employment. Somehow that goal had always been in the U.S. driving the fiscal policy, and that has been rejuvenated, I may say, by Bernard Bernanke in a way that before it was forgotten. And in fact, one major objective of macroeconomic policy, fiscal and monetary policy, is in fact promoting employment. That was lost during the globalization era, with the promise that globalization will bring higher level of jobs, diminishing poverty rate, and we are moving from an economy based on labor-intensive methods of production on knowledge-intensive. Now, if we look back at the results right now, some of it are fulfilled. Definitely, poverty rates have come down in many areas, but we are having a very high rate of inequality in income within the countries and across the countries. And to me, that is a major. I had a slide, I didn't put it, about the labor share in total income share. That has been dwindling rapidly. So globalization, by saying higher income for all, whether that is through employment or other means, has not been fulfilled. On the contrary, we are having much polarized society with very top earning income, not from employment, from mainly financial products, and those who are working are giving. So that is the value. And to me, the biggest challenge or shift in paradigm is not really machines producing or robotization, but it is the valuing of financial products that has been driving the economy and the profit making rather than real economy. And I think that is the fundamental challenge and the fundamental how would I say, unfulfilled promise of globalization that is there and that we need to tackle. There was also a question, so what do we mean by pro-employment macroeconomic framework? We mean macroeconomic policies that do not necessarily have as the primary and only objective inflation targeting below 5%. There is no scientific evidence that there is any magic bullet about this 5%. And this is constraining in many economies, including developing economies, the employment generation factor. That is not to say we should go in high inflation and we shouldn't look at macroeconomic stability. The debt to GDP thresholds that are given as a rule of, law, again, look at the evidence and studies not of ILO and the UNCTAD, but look at the evidence from IMF. It shows that there is no pattern, no route for these artificial levels of 40%, 60% debt to GDP threshold. So that is looking at the macroeconomic perspective from that aspect. Fiscal policy. You mentioned labor being taxed. Yes, labor is being highly taxed, and that is a problem in many countries. However, one has to look at it holistically because labor taxation is in fact feeding into social protection systems, the welfare society that is at the basis of the European model of development and well-being. So if you are taking it out from there, you have to find other ways of taxing to, in fact, feed the social protection with all the 18 questions that have been discussed. Another question that I want to address very briefly, is it a state or is it market? I think that example given by our last speaker was extremely important because it's about market solutions. But he just mentioned that the law and legislation was an enabling environment that is provided. In fact, we are seeing with the global crisis that the role of the public policy and the state is being rehabilitated in many places, including in Europe. That is not to say that the state is going to create jobs or we are going to go back to only public enterprises, but there is a case. All these countries are looking again into really what is an industrial policy for France, what is an industrial policy in UK. So it is also, I think, that role for the public sector to have the enabling environment for the private sector, including for small, medium enterprises, that is very important.